Americans are struggling to pay their bills, and for the first time in over a decade, credit scores are falling. According to this news article from CSNBC, high interest rates and higher prices have weighed on most Americans' financial standing. Consumers as a whole are falling deeper into debt, causing an increase in credit card balances and an uptick in missed payments. This article goes on to say that as of October, the average credit card utilization was at 35%, up from 33% a year ago. And just over 18% of borrowers had more than 30 days past due missed payments against their credit accounts, up from 16.5 the year before. It's crazy to think that 18% of borrowers have 30 days past due. That seems like a pretty high number. It also goes on to say that a likely driver is that savings rates have trended back down to zero, and those savings cushions that many consumers had have disappeared. So yeah, you remember all that free money that was given out during the pandemic. It has since been spent. Most people went out and they bought nice things. Some people probably went out and put a large down payment on one of those expensive pandemic cars. And after the lockdowns ended, people just started going out more because they've been tired of being cooped up in their houses. So they blew through all their savings, and now we have statistics like this to show for it. And not only is this showing up in credit scores, it's showing up in consumers' total outstanding credit, which leapt by $19.5 billion in January. The leap in consumer borrowing was higher than that forecasted by economists. The mean estimate for economists surveyed by the media was for an increase of $10 billion. So the actual numbers came in almost double what the economists predicted. But that also shows you that most economists don't know what the heck they're talking about. This article goes on to say that the increase in non-revolving credit was the highest in 7 months. And the total credit card debt outstanding in January was the highest ever, according to this report. Another part that factors into the higher debt burden on Americans is the fact that wages have stagnated or even declined, which, according to this article, the fact that employers are looking to cut costs might just be a matter of post-pandemic correction. However, your employer behind the scenes is probably seeing a decrease in order volume coming in, and they're probably seeing a decline for whatever type of business you're in. And according to this report, layoffs in February were the highest for any February since 2009. Now, from a historical perspective, February 2009 was on the tail end of the financial crisis, and it saw 186,000 layoffs announced. Now fast forward to last month, 85,000 job cuts were announced. And to date this year, there have been 167,000 layoffs announced. And these layoffs are affecting those who are employed as well, those people who kept their job or found other employment. Because if we go back to this article that we looked at earlier, it states that in 2023, there was a report by ZipRecruiter that showed 48% of 2,000 US companies surveyed lowered pay for certain roles. So if you've gotten laid off and you're going to seek employment somewhere else, the pay that you might have thought you had gotten for that position has likely been lowered by that company. See, there's consistently new information coming out in the news, so much so that you probably forgot some of the reporting that was going on a couple years ago. The reporting back then was people were flush with money and they basically were quitting their jobs. Whether they were in a 2-household income and they just decided that they could make it on one, or they just had enough money stashed away from all of that free stimulus that was given out that they basically just said, hey, I don't need to work for a while. Well, when that happened, there was a lack of qualified applicants. So all these companies were raising their pay in order to attract employees, attract applicants to their company. Well, now fast forward to where we are now, everybody has blown through all those savings and they're back to applying for jobs. Except this time, companies are actually laying off employees and cutting roles in order to save money. So there's more people applying for these jobs, which means that the companies can offer less pay for the positions. This simply goes back to supply and demand. Just like everything, it's a supply and demand issue. If you got a lot of people looking for a job and very few roles, the companies can actually afford to lower how much they're going to pay somebody in order to get that position filled. And if you're going to be making less money, it's going to be very hard to keep up. So if you're lucky enough not to get laid off, or you're lucky enough to find another job, if you did get laid off, you're going to be struggling. Remember, the cost of living now has basically doubled, but your take-home pay hasn't. The cost of food is 24% higher than it was before the pandemic. Insurance in some places has doubled. I'm a real estate investor, and virtually all of my properties have seen a notable increase in property taxes. So property taxes have gone up for almost everybody across the board. How do you think they're trying to pay for all of that stimulus that was dumped out into the economy and all that lost tax revenue from everybody staying home and all those businesses being shut down? They're going to jack up your property taxes. Your car loan payment, if you have one. If you purchased a car sometime after the pandemic, that car payment is probably as much as a house payment was before 2020. You know, $1,000 car payment is fairly normal now, $900 to $1,000. And that's why you're seeing reports of all these delinquent car loan payments, because people just can't keep up. And now to add to all this, people are going to be losing their jobs. So you need to be aware of these things that are coming in the future. It's going to be a lot harder to get by than it was before. And the mainstream media doesn't want you thinking about this stuff. They keep coming out with these fantastic jobs reports, all these jobs added to the economy. But what they don't tell you after the stock market shoots up is 2 months later, there is a revision. And over the last 13 BLS reports, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics gives out these reports. There's been 13 of them. Of those 13, 12 have been revised down, and in some cases by half. So we have a downward trend of jobs being added to the economy, and the unemployment rate is slowly ticking up. Guys, these are the things that mainstream media doesn't want you to know about during an election year. I mean, they're reporting on this stuff, but they're not even making a very big deal out of it. You've got credit scores falling, household debt is at an all-time high, car loan delinquencies are on the rise. People can't afford to live because no matter what they say, inflation is still out of control. Food is 23% more than it was before the pandemic. Insurance is more than it was before the pandemic, double in some cases. Companies are laying off at record pace. They're trying to make everybody think that everything's okay, but you need to be prepared for this. I mean, it's interesting that during an election year, you're seeing this reporting in the news of the Biden administration trying to keep people out of foreclosure. Or just recently at the State of the Union address, he's saying he's going to give people $400 a month for up to 2 years in order to help them afford a home. I mean, why would they have to do that? It's because there's a freaking bubble in the housing market and people just can't afford to buy a home. I mean, interest rates aside, if you lower the interest rates, homes are still going to be unaffordable. The gap in wages and the cost of the average home is just so large that lowering the interest rates is not going to help anybody. I mean, it might put a little bit of a Band-Aid and help a few more people afford a home, but it's still a huge problem. So the reason to be aware of all this stuff is if your company's laying people off, you might not want to slack off for a little while. You got to be aware of these things and just be prepared so you're not left in the dust when the proverbial you-know-what hits the fan. So keep an eye out for all these things. I mean, every day you're seeing something more in the news that just makes this all seem a little bit fishy. Mainstream media isn't reporting on all this stuff. They gloss over it and they move on to the next thing, like how good the stock market is doing. But the stock market is not a representation of the actual economy. So you've got to be aware of all these things and be prepared. The only way for you to be prepared is to stay informed. So please smash that like button, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you on the next one.